Right, okay. So this video is just going to be basically going through the basics of Python. So like the fundamentals, the syntax, all that sort of stuff. Just to keep you with like at the very least a basic understanding of how it all works and all that sort of stuff. Because obviously pretty much the best way to learn it, if you don't understand it, that is to see it done live, I guess, and stuff like that. Rather than just looking at screenshots or whatever. So yeah, so hopefully it will help those that may be struggling with it a little bit. So the main fundamentals, let's say, that you're always going to use in every program you make will be print, probably input, and then you'll also use strings and variables. Okay, so print and input are actual code words that you use as they are, and they do a specific thing in programming, in Python specifically. And then strings and variables are things, but they're not used as the word string and variable. They are things that are used, but not the actual things. All right. So before we get even into that, we need to know this word. Okay, syntax. Now syntax is essentially, and you have this in all programming languages and all languages in general, really. And it's basically the rules that the language has to follow for it to work the way that it works, right? So in English we have a syntax, which means that things have to be spelt in a specific way. You have to use commas, like other punctuation marks, in a certain way. So like, for example, in English we'd obviously use a full stop at the end of a sentence, or a comma in the middle of a sentence for a break, that sort of stuff. And in programming languages it's exactly the same, but obviously they work in a different way. So the syntax of a programming language is the rules it has to follow for it to work. Okay, so in programming, as I'm sure you're aware, so like things, for example, print, we use print all the time. But if I was to use print with a capital P, it wouldn't work. Okay, that's against the syntax. All right, and then much like that, if we have, so to just write hello, for example, and we run that, we can see on the output it shows up as hello. That is because the way that the syntax works is, for print to work, we need the brackets and we need the quotation marks for hello, for the string, but we'll get to that. But yeah, and all that sort of thing works. So the reason why we have, moving on to print now, the reason why we have the brackets there is basically anything that's inside those brackets is what's going to print. Okay, you'll find with input, you'll find with various other things, like functions and stuff like that. I'm getting to that, but they all have brackets like after the word that we use, and that is basically to show the parameter of that value. So with print, we want to print whatever's inside those brackets. With input, it's the same thing, obviously, but with input it's slightly different. And yes, anything that's inside the brackets, that's what's going to be used by whatever word you're using. So in this case, print. Okay, now with a variable. So a variable is something that can change, or something that temporarily stores a value. Okay, so for example, we could have name equals Mr. Green. All right, so we've got that. So what we've got here, so name is our variable. Okay, now with that, you can name your variable whatever you want it to be. Okay, realistically, I could call that potato if I really wanted to. It wouldn't make a difference. All right, but what's just a general sort of good idea, I suppose, is to name it something related to the value you're storing. And that's just really to help you, because then you understand, if you've got, like, let's say 10 variables, you know which one's storing what value, basically. All right, so in this case, for example, we've got name, which is our variable. The singular equal sign kind of means it is. So the value of name is Mr. Green. So now we know whenever we use the variable of name, it's going to know that the value of that is Mr. Green. So if, for example, we have print name, just like that, when we press run, in the output it says Mr. Green, because that is the value of name. Okay, now I could change the value of name to Mr. Blue, and when we run it, it now says Mr. Blue, right? So whatever the value of name is at the point of printing, that's the value that it is. All right, because we could even have this a couple of times. All right, and we can have that as Mr. Blue, then Mr. Pink, and then Mr. Green. And when we press run, it's only going to show Mr. Green. All right, because with programming, the way it works is basically it will start at the top line on the first line and read it line by line, essentially. So it'll read the first one, so it'll say, right, name is Mr. Blue, and it goes to the next line. All right, now name is Mr. Pink. Go to the third line, name is now Mr. Green. Fourth line, print name. So print the value of what the variable name is. And by the time it gets to line 4, the value of name is currently Mr. Green. So therefore that is why that one is the one printed out. Okay, now I've used all these inside a quotation mark, right? So what a quotation mark does, it basically means it is a string. Okay, now string can be any form of character. So that's a letter, a number, or a symbol. And I suppose the best way to think about how that works is think about how you use quotes in English, right? So if you're quoting someone, you are saying exactly what they've said, right? No matter what it is. So if I say print hello there, okay, because hello there is inside the quotation marks, it's going to print exactly that sentence, letters, anything like that. So I press run, it says hello there. All right, now we can really see what I mean by it prints exactly by doing a simple calculation. All right, so if I have 5 plus 5 without using a string, I press run, okay, and it shows up as 10. All right, the programming language realizes their numbers. It sees the operator of the plus symbol, so it knows the value of 5 is going to get added to the value of 5. So it gives us 10. All right, now if I change it up slightly and put the quotation marks in for the string, all right, what that now has done is it's lost, I suppose, lost the value of what those characters were. So it was 5, the operator plus, and the number 5. But now we've put it in a string inside quotation marks. It's now only seeing it exactly as what is inside the quotation marks. All right. So instead of typing out 10 in the output, it will now say 5 plus 5, because just like quotes in English, it's showing exactly what it says in the quotes, basically. All right, and that's how the string works, essentially. All right, so it's only looking at the exact value. All right, so we can put a few of these together. Okay, so if I say name equals Mr. Green, all right, so whatever happens, the value of name is my name. All right, so Mr. Green. Now, if I was to put print and then put hello, okay, we can run that, sure, but it only says hello. Okay, bit of a lag there, but it only says hello. Now the reason for that is because that's all we've printed. All right, so you've got to remember as well, when you are programming, the computer will only do what exactly how you've asked it to do it. All right, so if I've only asked it to print hello, it's still stored name, the value of name is Mr. Green, but we haven't asked it to actually show that. Okay, so we can do that by doing print name like that. All right, now notice how I've not put, I'll delete that bit for a second actually as well. Notice how I've not put quotation marks around that value. All right, because if I press run now, it's going to print the value of the variable name, whereas if I put quotation marks around it, just like I said with the calculation, it sees exactly that, so it loses the value. Essentially, it's no longer seen as a variable, it's seen as a string, which is just a bunch of words, and it now says name. We don't want that. All right, so we don't have them. We only have the string for just text, or when we just want it to show something as just plain text on the output. Okay, now obviously if I was to print name like that, it's just going to say my name. It's a bit boring, it doesn't really do anything else. All right, so what we can do, we can what's known as concatenation, so we can basically join 2 or more separate things together. So in this case, we could add the variable name to the string Mr. Green. All right, so to hello, sorry, because Mr. Green is name. So to do that, we simply add a comma in between the different sections. All right, so I've got, in fact, I'm going to put it first. So if I put a string of hello, all right, and then I put my comma on the other side of the string, and then name, what I've now done is I've joined the value of that string and the value of that variable together. So when I press run, it says hello Mr. Green. All right, so it's joining or concatenating those two things together. All right, now we can get a bit harder with that, okay, because obviously what it's doing here, we've preset what the value of name is before we've even run the program, and so therefore it's saying hello name, but we already know what it's going to say because we already know what the value of name is. Okay, so we can change it up slightly. Okay, and this is where we use something called the input. All right, so I'm going to delete that bit for now. All right, we can keep that bit. And what we're going to have now is input. All right, now input is very similar to print. All right, in terms of print will show something in the output. Okay, input also does that. However, the difference is with print, it will print what you want it into the output and then just carry on with the code. Input will wait until the user responds. All right, now what I mean by that, if I just briefly just have hello, if I was to copy that and paste it 3 times, I run it and it will say hello 3 times. It'll just do the line, carry on. Now input will not do that. It will wait until there's a response first. Okay, so in fact, if I put them there and I just put input, like press enter to continue, and I press run. So obviously I've got 4 lines. We've done it before and it printed all 3 hellos straight away. This time you can see it says press enter to continue. We've got a little like area there where we can enter our value or whatever it might be, but it hasn't shown lines 3, 4 or 5 yet until I give it an input. So in this case, because I've not asked it to do anything really, so I press enter and then it carries on with the code. All right, so that's the main difference there. Input will wait for a response, print will just carry on. Okay, now with the input, sometimes, let's say for example you wanted to ask somebody their name. All right, so we can have the question, what is your name? Okay, now at the moment I could run that, it would work fine because I could type in Mr. Green there. All right, and I could press enter. Great, the program works. However, whilst I've made an input, it doesn't actually apply that value anywhere. All right, so what you can do is you can apply just like we did before. So before we had name equals Mr. Green, like that. All right, now this time it's essentially doing the exact same thing. All right, so we can do name equals like that. Okay, the difference is with line 1 here, this one is presetting what the value of name is before we start the program. All right, and line 2 is basically waiting for the user to give name a value, but they do the exact same thing. They both store a value to the variable name. All right, so I can delete that one for now because we're doing the exact same thing here. All right, so and then what I can do is I can, if we remember from before, I had hello comma name. All right, but it's going to do the exact same thing. The difference is obviously this time it's asking the question first. All right, so before it just had Mr. Green already, so it would just come up with hello Mr. Green. This time it gives me the opportunity to type in Mr. Green, press enter, and it says hello Mr. Green. All right, now the reason why we can do stuff like that, if I was to run it again, I've not changed anything about my code, and this time I could put Mr. Blue and it says hello Mr. Blue. So whatever you enter, so as the user, whatever you enter, that is what's going to become the value of that variable. Okay, and that's that main difference there. So, and the beauty of that is, so the way that works essentially, if you ever played a video game that you know, asks for your name at the very start of the game, it's essentially doing that. Okay, so it's asking your name, you type in your name, and it remembers that because it's stored your name as a variable, so it can use it throughout the game. All right, so whenever there's a cutscene, it will say like, oh, like Mr. Green, like this is what's happening now. What are you going to do? Whatever it might be, but it's because it's stored your name from the very start. Okay. Now from there we can go into what's known as a selection statement, all right, or most commonly and easily known as an if statement. All right, and what that is basically it's allowing us to have multiple different variations, and this will be the last bit for the video, multiple different variations depending on the criteria given, which is good in cases like a quiz, for example. So if we had like what color is Pac-Man, all right, as our question, we'll change the name to Q1 as well. All right, because remember, it's always good to call it something that relates to the value you're storing, and this is a question 1. Let's say we're doing a quiz, so it's question 1. We're going to store it as question 1. All right, so up until this point, if this is the first time you're learning programming, all you know is that you can type in print and say like well done or whatever. Okay, so if I press run, it will ask me the question, what color is Pac-Man, and I can put in yellow because that is the answer. I press enter, it says well done. The issue with that, however, is that if I press run again, I've never heard of Pac-Man, I type in blue, it will say well done still. All right, which is obviously an issue because that's technically not the right answer. Okay, so that's where an if statement or a selection statement will come in. All right, because what we can now do is we can create different variations of response depending on the user's entered criteria, essentially. All right, now there's 3 elements to an if statement, and that is if, elif, and else. Okay, so these all work in that specific order. They always have to go in that order. Okay, so if always goes first, because it's basically saying if this happens, do something. Elif is it means else if, which is basically like another option. Okay, so if this happens, do that, or if it's this criteria or this option, then do that. And then else is slightly different, and it basically says if it's anything else, this is what's going to happen. Okay, so if we start off with if, all right, so the way we would work it, so if it was to write it in a sentence to start with, just to help us visualize. Okay, so what color is Pac-Man? So if the answer is yellow, then we want to print, then like say well done. All right, that's essentially what we want the program to do. All right, and it's always best to think about in English, like, because that's obviously what we know. It's best to think about it in that sense. All right, so we know we want the program to say that, work out whether the answer is yellow, and if it is, then we're going to say well done. Okay, and now we can break it down from that point. All right, so if we know that, that's fine there. All right, the answer, now we get the answer from looking at the bit at the top, the question. Okay, now that is related to Q1, so we're going to put Q1 there instead, because that is essentially the answer, because that's where the answer gets stored. Okay, now is yellow, so we're looking for an exact answer there, which is yellow in this case. Okay, so what we can do is can become a double equals sign. Now that's slightly different to the single equal sign we saw here. So question 1 is the answer to that question. All right, double equal sign basically means is equal to. So if question 1 is exactly yellow, essentially. Okay, now yellow by itself, all right, that's just a string, because that's just what we're hoping the user enters. So by that logic, we put it in a string because it's just text. It's just what we are expecting from this answer. Okay, so it now says if question 1 is equal to yellow, which is what we wanted to. All right, now this part here, say well done, that bit comes from a print, because if you just want to say something and it carry on with the code, we print it. Okay, now the difference is that does not happen on this line. All right, the reason for that is because we only want that bit to print out if this criteria is met. Okay, because if it's not met, we don't want it to print well done, because you'd be wrong. Okay, so what we do at the end of this line is put a colon. All right, that kind of means then. So what line 2 says here is if the answer to question 1 is exactly yellow, then, and then we go to the next line. And what you'll notice about this next line on line 3 is the cursor is indented slightly. Okay, now the reason for the indentation is because it's only going to happen if this criteria is met. All right, and obviously if it's not, it gives it the opportunity to ignore it, because if you remember from what I said earlier on in the video, it will start here reading, and it'll read that line, then it'll read that line, and because it starts here, there might be nothing there. So unless this bit's met, it can then have the opportunity to then just go to line 4 and see what's next. All right, so then on this line, we simply put print well done. All right, so if we test that real quick, so we press run, it says what color is Pac-Man? I type in yellow, press enter, and it says well done. All right, and now currently, if I was to type in blue or literally anything else at this stage, nothing will show up, which already shows that we've got more than one option. We've either got, it says well done if you get the correct answer, or it says nothing. So this is where we can then program the other bits. Okay, so when you go to the next line, just be careful not to keep it indented. So we do a cheeky little backspace, and then we move on to the elif. All right, so you can only ever use if once. All right, and then elif, because it's basically saying or if, so the other options, you can use an elif as many times as you want. Okay, so just because we're doing it basically at the moment, so we're not going to go into any way of how we can change it, so we can just do it all in this one line. We're just doing the very, very basic stuff here. So if we do elif, we can do another option. So in this case, we could do elif q1 is equal to yellow, like that. Okay, now what you'll notice is it looks the same to us because we speak English. We know that yellow and yellow are exactly the same. Computers are realistically stupid. All right, they only do exactly what we've told them to do, and we've at this point told them to look for the exact version of yellow that you see there that's highlighted, which has a lowercase. All right, now if you know anything about ASCII or remember anything about ASCII, each value, each letter, each character has a different value to allow the computer to understand the difference, essentially. All right, so by that logic, a lowercase y and an uppercase y to a computer are two completely different things. So to us, it's just saying yellow twice, and it's like, well, what's the point? But to a computer, they're completely different words. Okay, so which is why we could do it this way. There are obviously other ways, like you can do dot lower here, whatever, but I'm not going to go into that because it's just the basics for now. So then we can just simply do another print. So print well done. I'll just add a couple of exclamation marks just to show it's different for now for the example. And what we'll do now, we'll just test it again, just to make sure it's works. So just like last time, I put yellow lowercase. It says well done. I run it again. I put a capital Y. All right, press enter, and it says well done with the exclamation marks. Right, so we can already see there. Whereas before we could only have one response, we've now got the opportunity for two separate variations depending on what you've selected. All right, and then so you can do as many elifs as you want. So if you really want to, you could do different like versions of yellow, or you can do like this one's wrong or this one's wrong or whatever. But in this specific example, you could just go to an else. Right, now else is different. All right, you'll notice how I've already done the colon. All right, so if we set a criteria, then we get to the colon. Elif, we set a criteria, then we get to the colon. Because else is essentially saying anything else, literally anything else, other than what we've already selected, we don't need a specific criteria because anything that's not a criteria, essentially. So we just do else like that and print you're wrong. All right, because if it's not right, it's wrong in this situation. All right, so now we've covered every single possible variation of in a basic sense. So I could type in yellow like I did before. It says well done. I could type in yellow with a capital Y. It says well done with exclamation marks. And now if I type in anything else, so I could type in blue or Lou because I missed out the B apparently. It says you're wrong. I did it again. I could type in red. It says you're wrong. I can literally type in whatever I want, and it's just going to say I'm wrong. All right, because what the if statement is doing is it's checking if either that criteria is met or that criteria is met, and if it's not, then it'll read this bit instead. So it gives us multiple options or multiple outcomes depending on the answer to that one singular question. All right, and that's how it works. All right, so hopefully all of that made sense. Hopefully all of that allowed you to understand a bit better of the basics at the very least. I'll probably do another video at some point with the more advanced stuff like loops and whatnot. But for now, we'll just keep it there because they are the basics. If probably going into the more intermediate stuff if you can't remember anything about programming. But we'll go from there, all right? And obviously just ask me if you have any other questions. Hope it helps. Thank you.